Welcome to First Line Compliance's Carefully Off the Cuff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Weinberg.
And I'm Raymond Snytsheuvel, and we're with First Line Compliance.
Thanks for joining us. Today, we're here and going to talking about state exams. I'm sure one of many people's favorite subjects.
I personally do like state exams. One of my favorite subjects. It's a fun challenge to have. Gets document intensive, but otherwise, I actually do like state exams. So I'm glad to be on this one. So, Josh,
to bring a balanced point of view.
Yeah. Well, it's a living. So anyway, Josh, I want to cover a few things. We should cover a few things. One, let's talk about what you do with pre-examination. I think pre-examination is getting heavier and heavier. These days, I'd like to see what we do about during the examination, trends that we're seeing, and then ultimately, what do we do with the final exam report? I think all of them there's a lot of science behind it, but I think in all of them, there's a lot of art as well. So I'd like to cover some of that if possible. So on pre-exam, Josh, pre-exam questionnaires, those are getting thicker, a lot more questions, a lot more documents. What are your thoughts on that?
So a couple of things. I think some of the things that are new are some of the things that are the old. One of the key requirements, or one of the key things I would keep in mind, is you're usually given a checklist of items to provide the items. If they don't apply, explain that. And if they do, make them easy to identify. So they're usually given a number and some sort of numbering sequence and a title. Use that numbering convention and title. It makes it far easier for the examiner to know that they've gotten what they've requested. Beginning that process of relationship, of making it easier for the examiner to do their job, will go a long way in making the exam a lot smoother.
I agree with that. I think it establishes the relationship from the beginning, right? So we have to understand that the examiner doesn't know our business, and we don't want them to make assumptions or presumptions. We'd rather just coach them through it and say, this is who we are, what we do. I have noticed in recent times that the amount of information they're asking is a lot, and if you miss some of the data points, some of the items, that might rub them wrong. And maybe for good reason, but I might rub them wrong. What I've done in many times as well is, if I don't know if they need this information or it's that critical, I would indicate somehow that I've given everything here. We've got most of the information. If you think we're missing something, please let us know. I wouldn't want them to think that we're hiding something, right, or whatever, or that we were negligent. It's just a matter of, we did the best we can in the time frame that we had, and we think this is materially everything you have. If you can't get information, you can't get it. But somewhat be open with that. But yeah, I agree. I think you are really establishing the relationship, and if that's the time to set the tone and let the examiner know who you are, what your business is about, what it is not about, and from the get go. So I agree. I think that's going to be a key.
You hit the key for me. Relationship. Giving the examiner the sense of, or the picture of who you are as a company, how you operate, your culture of compliance. That goes a long way. It's almost tongue in cheek of just providing the materials they ask for, but it does demonstrate that you're able to provide it. I agree with you, maybe blending into our second point here.
For sure.
There has been more, I think, of a tendency for examiners to be a little less forgiving in timeframes. That they set a response deadline and expect you to hit that, primarily because they see the exam as a validation or a check, if you will, on whether you're able to meet the record keeping requirements, the preparedness requirements, the production of documents requirements that go into the state licensing requirements. And if you're not able to provide those on time, or don't have a good reason why not, again, it could potentially show a weakness in the company's compliance posture.
I agree. I think they're testing our compliance sensitivities, right? How seriously are we taking this, and what do we know? So, if you come back with answers that are not answering the question, then you maybe don't have the right person in the right chair to deal with state examinations, and they're going to take some note of that. So again, it's about maintaining the relationship. That being said, it seems that examinations trend up and down, and their focus. I will even say some states. I know a state that likes to focus on ECOA, because that's their thing. Perhaps others might be privacy. We know a few states that are big on accounting, right? And they want to see the documentation, accounting, and will really nickel and dime and calculate everything. Great, good for them. But there are some things that I'm bubbling up. Some I will say, like in California, we know we have the per diem issue. We kind of understand how we calculate and document per diem. But I think we should be reminded that the state examiners will probably be asking for documentation that maybe we don't use in a normal course of business to calculate per diem. Now, if you know that California, you can only collect a certain amount of per diem, in each transaction, and it's a matter of law. And so it really it's gauged by disbursement date. So they really want to make sure, the examiners want to make sure you got that disbursement date right. We typically look at settlement statements. I'm hearing now they're leaning more, they've done it before, but even increasingly, I think, is looking for disbursement ledgers from the escrow companies and the closing agents. Not always an easy document to get. But that's something that's trending up, I've noticed. Anything else? What have you seen insofar as like trending and things?
Yeah, a few things. So one that kind of makes sense is a larger desire or push for documentation of remote work policies and practices.
Mhm.
How companies have responded to COVID and its impact. Some of that impact faded less and more into the background, but others still standing. So while many companies were mostly on site, and then because of COVID went to remote work, many of those folks have not returned to office. And I think that's largely a good thing, seeing states that have become more accepting of allowing remote workers. And I do think that's a trend that's going to persist. But it is then incumbent on companies to have a policy to explain how they do that. And again, the safeguards or controls they have in place to meet those standards. So as California put out more prescribed requirements, Oregon, Washington, similar. I think it's great, Texas even, that we've seen these documentation of allowances of remote work, so long as we have the documentation and the infrastructure in place in order to support it.
Yeah, I what I've seen and the way I call it through is I think there's probably more than two items. I'm going to say there's two items when you talk about remote that are real key. Privacy or information security, how you're controlling that information. The states want to know that. Can they print in their home office or not? Do you have shredders or not? So it's really key about protecting the information. Now, I would say in the day of technology, we have everything is dialed into the company and not on site, local at somebody's house. But that's what they're looking for. So I think technology solutions to control that is going to be real critical. The other one is supervision. And so they want to know, how are you supervising people? How do you train them? How do you, provide information, update them? And then there are things you can do, have regular meetings, etc. But I really think the supervision issue starts coming up more and more as well. So I think between like information security and supervision, if you really focus on those two things, I think that's key solution.
Let me add a third. It's doing anything that would otherwise make the location a branch. So advertising, meeting people there, putting it on business cards. Those activities would also kind of prevent it from being a remote location, because now you're treating it like it's a branch.
Right. So you don't want borrowers coming to your house while you're wearing flip flops. I guess that's right. So fair enough. But you're right. I think that's key. So I do see that kind of as a trend. I think I do believe that states are being increasingly I'm going to say vigilant. They're being a little bit more direct on what they're looking for, and they're not as forgiving always on certain things, where maybe they were in the past. And I think that's important. I think we just have to be aware that they take it very seriously. They should. This is their consumers are protecting, and so we need to respect that. But I think we really need an increased vigilance on the business side to make sure we're prepared for state examinations and respect the requests that we're getting in, and treat it as every request is reasonable enough, and do the best you can to answer it during the exam.
Ray, let me throw in one more trend I'm seeing, and then we'll pivot towards sure. What do you do towards the end of the exam. So the other, I think that's kind of becoming more common across the states is examination related to TRID compliance, whether it's the correct disclosure for simultaneous issuance of owner's title insurance. That one industry struggles with pretty broadly. We see that at a lot of clients, and despite having instructions, and it's not always just the lender's faults, because sometimes the closing agent doesn't provide information. SIMO, I think, is going to be us compliance nerds' legacy issue. Another changes in circumstance. I think that's becoming a larger focus area, particularly in the peak volume times during COVID, where we had appraisal rush fees or no one willing to take my appraisal fee, and those costs got put on to consumers. Documenting the legitimate reason for those changes in circumstance, I think, is going to be important and continue to be seen. So let me kind of just push through. We've completed our exam. We've gotten our report. Where do we go from here, Ray?
Well, okay. So I really think you look at the final report. We get exit meetings. Again, exit meetings are just an idea of where they're going to go with it. It's not finality, and it's not really, if you have any issues or anything to contest, it isn't necessarily there. You could, maybe some correction issues, etc. But really, you're waiting for the final examination report. And to me, the first thing I do is I look at the findings and find out whether the examiner had a fair opportunity to look at these issues correctly. Did I not maybe explain something correctly? So if I see a finding and I don't agree with it, it's like, well, maybe I didn't explain it correctly. Maybe I didn't provide the right documentation. Maybe the document was in the file, they just didn't see it, or it was filed differently, and then let me go find it. So sometimes the findings themselves, as much as they say they're final, I think you have to take the first step to find out if you agree with the finding or not. And if not, maybe take the opportunity to go back to the examiner and explain and educate them as to why you think the finding is invalid based on what you have and your understanding, and take it from there. So I don't think we should take the report automatically for what it is. I think you need to consider the validity, if you will, of the finding. I believe that the finding was duly issued by the examiner, but they maybe weren't armed with all the information they should have been when the finding was issued, and that could be on us because we didn't provide the information. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, so a couple of key themes for me. Be respectful. Remember your examiner is a person too. I think in the beginning of the exam, we talk about setting the culture of demonstrating our culture of compliance, how we see examination. At the end, it's time to repeat that. And I think in general, to the extent we've proven in our interactions in the exam that we're willing participants, that gets us some buy-in. And I think it opens up the exchange to be educational, that we both actually want the same thing. We understand we're not perfect. Exam helps us get closer to that. We're working really hard. We're putting a lot of resources to try and do our best. And we understand we may not see it all. So thanks for pointing out areas we can improve. That being said, I 100% agree with Ray. When there are issues that you feel are not accurately portrayed in the exam results, then it's our responsibility to explain it better, to demonstrate why or what information would overturn a finding that was provided.
Yeah. And I think finally, when we're talking about, at some point you say we accept the finding, but here's remedial action. That kind of goes hand in hand. If you have a finding that isn't a valid finding, perhaps, and then you write a remedy to remedy that, now you're over complying, perhaps, or creating issues, a solution for there really was no problem. So take the opportunity to get the clarity from the examiner. And then ultimately, when you do take remedial action and it's a legitimate findings, what you have to do, don't necessarily over comply. It's not because the states they're not asking you to overcomply. They want you to remediate the problem as succinctly and tightly as you can. You don't need technology to be ever answer if to document who took the class of his training or whatever. You can use an Excel sheet. There's certain ways you can do it. Don't try to overcomply, because then you're stuck with that burden over the years to do the same thing because the state examiner said so. And of course, the state examiner said, we never said that. You said that remedial action. We didn't put that in place. Put something in that makes sense for your company, the size of your company, and at the same time, the examiner is going to look at you and say that was a reasonable remedial action. So that's, I think, well, we have to approach these. These things are, like I said, there's some science to it, but there's a lot of art. And I think it's important that, giving it everything that we've talked about here, you apply that, in a smart way. No one's expecting perfection. Maybe they are, but they shouldn't be expecting perfection. We're doing the best we can with the resources we have. We always do. But then project it as much as you can during the examination. So I kind of think that's kind of the thought process behind it.
Last part for me, know when to get help. There are a lot of folks out there that spend a lot of time working on responses to state exams, have relationship with the examiners.
Yes.
And sometimes the act of getting help, hiring additional staff or getting it from the outside goes a long way in demonstrating your commitment to remediating any issues that might have come up.
You can get yourself a state exam coach. That's what you can get, right? So, get someone to coach you through it. I think it's a good point. Well, I think that's about it, Josh. So any final thoughts on that?
Just want to thank everyone for joining. We look forward to seeing you soon. Give us a call if we can help or answer any questions. Tag us with your comments, like us, subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.
Love you too. Thank you.